Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kevin Delaney. I'm the editor of Quartz, which is a global business news site found online at qz.com. You all should have gotten an email news briefing that we wrote specifically for you all this morning. We're live streaming this discussion on qz.com. We happen to be up against one of the things that the internet cares most about in this live stream, which is Apple announcing new products. So if you can build up some viewers for our live stream, we appreciate it. It's going to be a tough haul. I'd also ask you, if you have any questions, you can submit them by Twitter during the discussion. There'll be time at the end where we'll take the questions from Twitter. And the way that you do that is to just tweet with the hashtag CGI 2016. So we'll get into our discussion now. So speaking broadly, transitional periods in society are some of the trickiest to navigate. And they're some of the most important tests of our values, our resolve, our humanity. They're daunting. And it's easy to see examples where we fail to navigate them successfully. They're important transition moments coming fast upon us in areas such as how artificial intelligence and automation will affect our own work and the jobs available to our children. The discussion today is about another critical transition to sustainable practices, economics, jobs, as the impact of climate change is felt and the potential intensifies for a deeper crisis in coming decades. So as you've heard, we have three panelists from different parts of this equation. We have next to me Donnel Baird. He's the CEO of a for-profit startup that's focused on developing clean energy projects in inner cities. Next to him, we have Adrianna Quintero. She's the founder of a coalition of businesses and health and community organizations representing millions of Latinos focused on clean energy and sustainability. And then at the end, there's Paul Bowers, the CEO of an energy company, Georgia Power, whose headquarters is just a few blocks away. So, Paul, I'm going to start with you, and maybe you can talk to us about what a transition looks like for a company like yours to a sustainable business and an environmental role.
Well, you think about our company, it's 132 years old, and when you look at the transition over time, we were once a transit company, we had a gas company, and by the way, we're now buying that company back called Atlanta Gas Light. And we looked at, the model that you have to be successful. And in any transition, you have to look to the future of where are we headed. If we're going to be in a low carbon environment, we have to think about the next iteration of generation that's going to be forthcoming. And what do our customers want? They want reliable, low cost energy that's clean, that's affordable for the long term. And for us, as we look at our fleet, and when we think of generation resources, it's a fleet of assets that are here to provide you service. Well, if you look at low carbon environment, so that means you have to look at resources that you have to deploy for that. That means more renewables. That means you have to reduce your dependence on coal and look at iteration of the next generation of nuclear for the future. So we're in the middle of that transition for us. We've gone from 70% of our energy being produced by coal to now coal is producing about 30% of our energy. 50% of our energy is coming from natural gas and the rest with nuclear and hydro. So you see the transition occurring for us. But you look at our longevity, you have to adapt. You have to look at what's going on within the consumer's mindset and really try to address that.
How are you managing that in terms of your workforce and in terms of jobs? That's one of the hardest part of a transition like that, I suspect.
It is, and over the last couple of years, we've announced 16 units being closed, affecting 500 people, and that transition is thoughtful. You have to start positioning that dialogue with our team about what are the skills we need for the future, where do we need to deploy them, and can we go through an attrition process too. When we have openings, can we replace those individuals in those new jobs? A lot of our resources have gone to our wire side of our business and to our nuclear construction side of our business where we're building those two new units.
And so this is an interesting, probably a side point, but you're manufacturing 2 nuclear power plants. And how many are there being built in the United States at the moment?
So this is my soapbox. So when you think about the country. And yeah, renewable, no carbon emission resources. Nuclear's got to be part of the equation. You know, we always say we got to have all the above, all the different type of resources, and look at what we can do in America. There's 4 being constructed in America. There's 72 being constructed globally. 29 are in China today. Another 70 are being planned in China. 10 in Russia, 7 in India, 4 in the UAE, 4 in the South Korea, and 4 in America. And if you're going to address carbon issues, you got to combine that with a renewable effort in this country to have a backbone base load capacity.
I'm going to shift to Adrianna. So your constituency, the large populations of Latinos live in California and the Southwest. There's actually a fairly booming solar industry there. Maybe you could talk about how you're working with community leaders on this transition to make the most of it.
Yeah, absolutely. In preparing for this, I thought a lot about transitions and how they really don't wait for us. I'm a parent of a teenager, and you definitely know that you're going to get caught off guard. But luckily, when we're talking about the transition towards clean energy and the impacts of climate change, they're here now. This is not something that we're looking out 20 years into the future, and we have to deal with them now. We can't just bury our heads in the sand. So one of the motivator behind Voces Verdes was to really tap into and connect to the Latino community the way that we need to connect with all communities, frankly. But I think that for us, there was really a void of that representation from communities of color at all level. And showing that leadership exists in those communities and in all of our communities to speak out on what we need, what we want. And when we actually tapped into it, we saw that the support was incredible for clean energy, for climate action across the board. When you look at what's happening across the country on clean energy, we're very optimistic, but we need much more. And what we need to do is ensure that there's a pipeline so that our communities, and when I say our communities, I'm talking about communities of color, Latinos, African Americans, Asian Americans, Native Americans, I mean, really the bulk of the country and what our future will look like. We need to be a part of that equation. We need to be a part of the equation, not only at the ground level, but throughout it, from the labor jobs all the way to the top. And we have an opportunity to do that and do it right.
Can you give an example of how that's happening on the ground?
Yes, well, I think that there's a lot of room to grow there. What we are hoping will start to happen is that there'll be more training, more workforce development. What we're already seeing is that solar in places like California and the Southwest, as you're pointing out, Nevada, other places, despite political opposition, is taking hold because people want clean energy. As Paul mentioned, we want clean energy. We know that the future won't wait. And sadly, communities of color have suffered the burden of much of the pollution and continue to. So we know the urgency better than others have. We've not had the fortune of being able to say it's over there. So what we are seeing now is the growth in places like that. And fortunately, there are programs that are helping to ensure that low-income communities are able to, of all colors, are able to take part in the growing solar boom, in community solar projects, in projects where perhaps there aren't the proper roofs and others. There may be efficiency measures. There are many things. Solar energy is one part of the equation. Energy efficiency is, frankly, another huge part of the equation. So programs like the ones that Donnel will talk about are extremely, extremely important and useful. And we just need to keep our eye on the prize and know that we all need to be part of this in order to make it succeed.
So Donnel, you're trying to respond to some of the demand within the communities and tap into ways of financing it, ways of unlocking it that haven't been accessible. So you're working with small businesses, houses of worship, to make them more energy efficient. Can you talk about how you're doing that?
Sure, happy to. I'm a little bit nervous if I just faint and pass out. I hope everyone will forgive me.
We'll take over.
Sure. So in a great big room like this, right, it's really hot outside, it's really cool inside, and so the way that air kind of moves in and out of this room, there's a lot of mechanical engineering behind that, there's a lot of electricity behind that, And the Marriott can hire a large energy efficiency firm, many of which are publicly traded, like TRC, which is one of our partners in New York, or Amoresco. Marriott can just hire them to come in and green this building and really think about the way that air moves in and out of this building and how energy is consumed. But for a small church, and Reverend Warnock from Ebenezer Baptist Church just made his commitment, and we're proud to partner with him on that. Most churches, most synagogues, most community centers aren't able to afford the $20,000 to $40,000 to $50,000 of upfront costs that it takes to analyze their buildings and figure out what are the specific ways that they can move into solar or really move into energy efficiency and reduce their carbon emissions and reduce their costs. I talked to Derek Jackson in our working group earlier this morning. He's the leader of the NAACP in Mississippi. Some of his folks in Mississippi spend, he said, 41% of their total income on energy. 41%. And in the Healthy Buildings Commitment, you guys just heard about how the buildings are not only expensive to heat and cool, but they're also making our kids sick. One of our first clients in New York had a child die of an asthma attack, 4-year-old in kindergarten, and had an asthma attack. And so there is a significant demand in our communities, as Adrianna said, for clean energy, for green energy. And what's missing is the set of engineering services and financial services from the private sector to provide those services. Now, we can do what we've always done, which is to kind of go to the government and ask for subsidies. Some of that works, some of it didn't. If you look at the stimulus, there was lots of money for green energy in inner cities there. I worked on a lot of it as a consultant. And some of it worked, some of it didn't. What we do is focus on using cutting edge trends. You mentioned artificial intelligence, machine learning. How do you take those software trends that are disruptive to certain parts of the economy and kind of ride them so that communities of color can kind of own and operate the green and clean renewable energy technologies of the future. So that's what we do at Block Power.
So you mentioned there was a lot of hope coming out of the recession that green jobs were a sort of beacon of employment, and the expectations are probably out of line more than that sector, the green sector, could live up to in a short amount of time. But now, as we've talked about, there are opportunities in areas such as solar. What Donnel, maybe we follow up. What's your assessment of the outlook for green jobs as a real vector of employment?
I think it's the future of this country. I think whether you're in rural Appalachia or in inner city Brooklyn, where I grew up, or in Detroit, or here in Georgia, that is an economy that's going to be local. We're going to be producing our own electricity. We should be producing it where we can consume it and working with partners in the utility industry. We should be making sure that we own and operate the manufacturing facilities. And I think that all of that's on the table. I think it's a really important industry, particularly for communities of color, to get involved in on the ground floor. I do think that with any new industry, it takes time. I mean, if you read about the development of home mortgages, which is something that we all take as a granted, as a commodity. If we want a mortgage, you pretty much can get one in this country. Well, at one point in the 80s, that was a new financial product, and folks had to come up with the idea, and they had to tour the country for several years, 4 to 5 years, major investment banks, trying to educate people on what was a mortgage and how do you package it and securitize it in a way that makes sense so that it could be broadly adopted. And I think that the initial investments that the Obama administration made in green energy are paying dividends. Look at Tesla, right? That was the result of a $500 million loan from the federal government to Elon Musk. And so I think the industry is booming, and I think it's the future.
Paul, can I ask you the same question? Yep.
Sure. And when you think about Georgia specifically, let me give you some stats. We're one of the top 10 fastest growing states in America in solar. By the end of this year, we'll be the top 5, and that's without a mandate, a renewable portfolio standard. So we'll have over 1,000 megawatts of solar installed in the state of Georgia. And now we're going through a review with the Public Service Commission about the next iteration of solar applications within the state. Most of that's going to be utility scale solar, not necessarily rooftop, but because it's driven by the economics. But when you look at that 1,000 megawatts, about 1,000 jobs have been created in the construction side. So that's very good. But when you turn it over to operations, that's where you don't see a lot of employment. especially in the utility scale. You see maybe one person in a 30 megawatt solar field looking and operating that facility and making sure the maintenance is maintained for it. On the rooftop, you're seeing that it'd be an expansion of an HVAC contractor or electrical contractor, that they're saying, okay, if a customer wants this, I can do it and install it. Matter of fact, Georgia Power will do that as well. We'll go out, if a customer wants it, we'll install it for them. Economics drive a lot of these decisions. We have energy rates that are 15% below the national average, but there are customers out there that say, I want to do it no matter what the cost is in terms of economic paybacks. We want to be there for that. We want to integrate the systems, because the ultimate decision is going to be, do you want a battery? And do you want to look at storage? And do we have the foresight of what is it that we can supply to that customer?
I want to come back to batteries in a minute. Adrianna, is there, to transition people in terms of their jobs to the sort of things that Paul and Donnel have been talking about, you need probably money, training, education, caring people. Do those things exist in the appropriate quantities to on a human level make this transition happen for people?
I don't think we're where we need to be yet. I think we need more of that, and I think that Paul used a word that I think is really critical in answering and really in our entire conversation here, and that's you have to have the foresight. So Georgia Power has that foresight. Donnel has that foresight. Many other utilities, and most people here have that foresight here at CGI. But we need to make sure that that communicates all the way through, so that when we're talking about workforce development, we're talking with a vision that goes beyond the next 6 months. Any intelligent corporation is planning for the next 5, 10, 20. Technology is moving so fast, and I think Donnel talked about this, it's moving so fast and changing so quickly that it's hard to adapt. But that's where I think the government comes in. And I unfortunately am a policy wonk, and we at NRDC and OSSR do focus a lot on policy because we think that policy is a backbone that provides some of that. And the same way that Tesla exists because it had that backbone and that support of the government, we can and should and must, I think, have some of those policies that will help to allow our workforces to develop ahead of time and not just playing catch up, where we have our students who are not just those who are in high school already, but those who are just in elementary school, that they already are growing with that vision towards what can be, towards what is machine learning. All of us here on this panel probably just learned that term in the last maybe 10 years, but they know that. Many of our children know that. So we really need to focus on early childhood education, workforce development, and invest in that, because otherwise our corporations are going to suffer in the end. We're just not going to get there in time.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. You're absolutely right on the education side, and it goes back to foresight. When you look at the policy side of this, you've got to have the regulatory support. And within the state of Georgia, the Georgia Public Service Commission has been on the forefront of pushing to allow for more solar within the state, so that's critical. From a learning standpoint, 5 years ago, we initiated what we call Learning Power. So we're in the classroom, 3rd, 5th, 8th grade in high school, to give them insight about energy applications and where their careers might lead them, be it on the technical side, being that they want to be somebody who works on a solar field, or a lineman for us, not a lineman for the county, but a lineman for Georgia Power. But some idea about what they can do for the future. Now you have to go to early childhood education. You have to get in there because of the digitalization of what's going on in America and the technology that kids are going to face when they go into the workforce. They got to have the fundamental skills. We're investing in that. We're in there in the classrooms.
And I think part of what you probably have to do is that you have to look out into the future a little bit and think about where the opportunities are, particularly if you're training students in grammar school. You don't want to train them for jobs that are gone in 5 years because that part of the transition is over. So I have a question for each of you, which is, are there areas of technology or opportunity that classify as being the sort of things that are going to bring meaningful change going forward, or being business, employment, human opportunities that are here for the long term? So, Paul, do you want Do you want to, or Donnel, go ahead.
Sure. I'll just piggyback on that question on some of the comments that Adrian and Paul made earlier. I think that, let's talk about machine learning a little bit, right? As an emerging technology, or the Internet of Things. So recently, last month, Wired magazine had a magazine cover that was called "The End of Code," right? And so there's this idea that in our early childhood education, what we need to be doing for our high school students, junior high students, elementary school students, et cetera, is training them on computer programming. But this article argued that in 4 or 5 years, that computer programming is going to be obsolete. Many of us are used to thinking of computer programmers in Silicon Valley as a disruptive force to other parts of the economy. In this instance, they themselves may be disrupted by machine learning and artificial intelligence, where instead of the role of a computer programmer being to kind of write line by line to tell the computer exactly what to do, you actually need to learn how to train the computer just like you train a puppy, right? And you're training the computer how to search for its own answers to new sorts of problems that might emerge. You don't have to have all the answers up front as you do in current computer programming. And so one question is, should we be training our kids to code, or should we be training them for the next thing, which is learning how to operate machine learning and artificial intelligence? And obviously, I take a clear stand with making sure that all of our young people, particularly young people of color, are exposed to the latest and greatest technologies. And in fact, we're early adopters. If you look at Twitter rates, we use Twitter earlier and faster and at higher rates than other folks. I also think that the smartphone, particularly, is one of the technologies that we've built our business around. Gary Harris is here in the audience. He's a lay leader at Ebenezer Baptist Church, which was just announced as a commitment that we're going to green that church. And other Gary's out there, raise your hand. Yeah, talk to Gary if you want to participate in that project if you're in Atlanta. It's awesome. And how do you green not only that church, but other buildings around that church in historic Sweet Auburn, right? Which is a really important African-American historic neighborhood. And so you can use your smartphone to measure temperature and vibration and humidity and figure out what's going on in these buildings and rooms like this that feeds into your machine learning technology. So we think those kinds of things are really important, and we think they're important to the future of jobs in clean energy.
And you said you're hiring software engineers is.
Unfortunately, they're super duper expensive, so it's a good job to get if you can get it. But yeah, we're hiring tons of software engineers and data scientists and stuff like that for our company.
So what are you paying them?
What's that?
What's the salary?
We hired a data scientist that we pay $196,000 a year.
Yeah.
They're pretty good jobs.
Yeah.
There's a lesson to that.
These are jobs of the future.
Yeah.
But I want to add
Adrianna,
something to
yeah,
that. I
go ahead.
couldn't agree more with you, Donnel, and I think this is such a great conversation to have. What we need to be careful about is we need to demystify this, because it very quickly can turn into something that, oh boy, I don't know enough about technology to be part of this conversation. I'm going to identify myself as not part of that. And that's really very, very frequently happening with some of our younger Latinos, African Americans, and others. So we have to be very cautious, because I see the same thing happening as part of an environmental organization. Same thing happened with environmentalism. You know, we talked about data points and parts per million and parts per billion and this toxic and that toxic and all of this science that for a lot of people it's you know what, I've got too much going on. And we hear which has now become a cop-out, I'm not a scientist, therefore I don't believe in climate change or whatever it is. It's not true. You don't need to be a scientist to believe or know any of this. You don't need to be a technologist to be a part of this. But it's on us to make sure that we open the tent and open the conversation so that it is accessible. Because otherwise we're going to, again, create that, whether it's a digital divide, an environmental divide, whatever it might be, we're going to continue to widen that divide. So we need to be very conscious of that and create that access. If you want to talk about climate, just say this is why I care, because it's hot. I mean, obviously that's oversimplifying it, but we need to make sure that we make it okay for people to tell their stories and their reasons for coming to whatever movement it is that we're pushing, because otherwise we're just not going to have the representation that we need from all of our people.
And I'll just add to that quickly. Yeah, you know, I grew up here in Atlanta. I went to high school in Buckhead in Southwest Atlanta. for junior high, and I wasn't taught about software and technology, and we didn't have computers in our school, and I still don't understand technology. I mean, I hire these guys and I write a check. I don't know what the heck they do. I mean, and I lead a Silicon Valley venture capital backed technology firm, and it's difficult for me, and I do this on a day-to-day basis.
Do your investors know this?
Yeah, you may not want to
They
tell
are
them
aware.
that.
This is being live streamed, right? I gotta.
Yeah.
Anyway.
They're watching the Apple
but I
live
think it's
stream. Don't
important
worry.
to be candid about this because we don't want to preclude other people from. Even I, as a technology executive, struggle with this imposter syndrome of feeling like I don't have the right to explore what's going on with green technology or with artificial intelligence, and I have to give myself permission. And I think that's one of the important things, that we have to give ourselves permission to become familiar with these technologies, because my investors, there was a point at which they had to learn about computers as well, and whether they were 7 years old or 19 years old or 25, we just go back to that point and they recognize that I'm there, and so they hold my hand along the way, and that's what's important to focus on.
Danielle, don't you have to cast a vision about where technology's headed or where the opportunities will be so kids kind of get interested in that pathway forward?
Absolutely, absolutely.
So if you think about Atlanta and cast a vision for us in a smart city context, you can look 20 years out or 10 years out where automobiles are going to be, driverless. You're going to call them up on your iPhone, and you're going to be transporting people back and forth without driving yourself. You have to look at where mass transit's going to be and all the technology behind that. You're going to have inner city agricultural centers. Think about that. Where a lot of cities have deserts, now you're going to have agricultural, organic farms inside these older buildings where you're going to grow whatever food source that you're looking for. And that's all going to be driven by electricity, so there's going to be careers there. But you think about where you got to cast. So kids see that, not that you're going to be a welder, but you're going to be part of the team that's going to enable all this for our city. And that's what you get kids excited about the future.
I want to shift the conversation for a minute about adaptation, mitigation. So part of climate change that we haven't talked about yet is the very real impact in terms of, in some areas it's drought, in some areas it's rising waters, temperature changes, that sort of thing. Paul, is this something that Georgia Power is looking at? Are you trying to mitigate some of those impacts ahead of their arrival?
So, our view is find real solutions and start involving yourself in the innovation for the future, be it the technology advancements on batteries or, the combination of community solar platforms. But you also got to think about where we are. We've had 100 years of a generation of a source for us in terms of the technology, be it coal plants. And as we move away from that, what does it do for those communities that we serve? You think about the state of Georgia, we have 47% of our customers that make $40,000 or less. So our driver is around being affordable, reliable for them as well, because they're making those decisions at the kitchen table every day about energy or the cost of just living. So, my driver is how to make it economic. And I got to deploy all those resources possible to make sure it's economic. But when you think about a community, we shut down a coal facility. Near Milledgeville, Georgia, we just shut down Plant Branch. That transition, even though it was foreshadowed for a few years, hit like, a brick. The loss of tax base, and what does it mean to the services of that community and the 260 jobs that are no longer there. And you have to have, that, if you will, foreshadowing of what's going to happen to the community and get the policymakers of those communities think about the future of those communities. Because what will happen is a void will create, and the jobs are lost, and the services are gone, and the education system is collapsing.
How optimistic are you about the transition for communities that have traditionally been reliant on non-renewable energy sources like coal in particular?
I'm positive because, with economic development focused on those communities and thinking about putting a solar field at these facilities, at least gives them some tax base. Doesn't give them the employment base, but it gives them tax base. So we're thinking about those connectivities, if you will, for those communities, but it's a joint effort. because that void is pretty large.
Adrianna, in terms of the conversation about the impact of climate change in your coalition, what's the state of that in terms of the impact of the change itself and the level of concern and action?
Well, the level of concern is very great, and there's a definite urgency to act. But we are very optimistic. I think that Paul put it very well. There's no denying that the impacts are severe. You know, I think that we're all a little bit surprised at how quickly things are happening. You know, we didn't expect to see. We expected to see islands in the Pacific suffering. We didn't expect to see Paris underwater. You know, so things are happening a lot more quickly than we expect, and some of these transitions are going to hit us like a ton of bricks. But like my teenager, basically. Anyway, but no, I think that what we need is to do exactly that, is to face the facts. You know, if we keep on denying that these are urgent problems that we need to deal with now, we're not doing anybody any favors. So denying a problem doesn't make it go away. If I'm sick and I deny it, it's not going to make it any better. So this is something that we just need to treat as if it were an ailment. This is something, you know what, we're hit with this. How are we going to, because it is an ailment, truly, how are we going to deal with this? How are we going to adapt? Solar is an answer, wind is an answer, energy efficiency jobs are an answer. But I really think that some of the other items that you mentioned, you know, urban farming is an answer. There are ways that we can transform our cities that create adaptation opportunities, that make it a better livable community, make healthier communities, and will provide some of these opportunities that unfortunately we're transitioning out of. It's the same thing as, you know, the people who made the old rotary phones. Those factories came and went, and some were ready, some were not. So we just need to continue to do that. And I think that as Latinos, we're extremely optimistic. And we're very excited to talk, whether it's to these amazing Latino organizations who are leading, or Latino leaders, and realize that, hey, you guys can everyone can be part of this if we get in now and we all just focus on solving this problem together.
Donnel, what's your assessment of the resilience of the communities where you're working in the face of some real impacts arriving from climate change?
I think there's a huge opportunity. I think that the structures, whether it's financial structures, policy structures, of many of our institutions and organizations, particularly in inner cities, particularly in certain parts of rural America, they don't work anymore. They were designed 100 years ago or 150 years ago, and they need to change. I think that our generation is more diverse. I think we have grown up with a different kind of acculturation from one another in the educational system in our schools, and I think that we share a different set of values, and I don't think that we're as loyal to as many of the old institutions as the preceding generation. And I think that presents an opportunity for us in terms of community resiliency, because I think that there's new structures. So for example, our company, Block Power, we're a public benefits corporation. So we don't have to maximize profit to our shareholders legally, which is a new kind of corporate formation. And we worried that some of our investors would kind of look at it and say, what the heck is this? In your legal documents, you're telling me that you're prioritizing carbon emissions and job creation and economic development over financial returns. But some of our investors also care about climate change, and they care about what's happening in inner cities, and so they're willing to take that little bit of risk to give us the venture capital that we need to get started. What we have proposed specifically for resiliency in New York City and New York State is we had a huge hurricane that took a lot of the New York City underwater, Hurricane Sandy a few years ago. And we had a couple hurricanes upstate. And the governor has proposed to change the way that the utility companies are regulated in order to incentivize them to become partners. No disrespect, sometimes, at least in New York, the utility companies are antagonists, right? Because they don't want to deal with new technology, they don't want to deal with solar panels disrupting their grid. In New York, they're incentivized to partner with us. And so we've proposed for the poorest neighborhood in New York City, a community-owned microgrid which is a micro utility with solar panels on top, batteries underneath, that is 51% owned by the lowest income residents in New York City and 49% owned by the utility company. Now they both have skin in the game to own and operate this new corporate structure that incentivizes these low-income residents. Instead of passively consuming electricity, they're now more responsible for their own behavior because they get a cash dividend from their ownership shares in this new microgrid ownership structure. And so we think that these kinds of new structures can find ways to align incentives between investor-owned utilities, low and moderate communities, to utilize the technologies of the future to really unlock a lot of potential in what effectively is a $400 billion, United States investment opportunity.
And there's a for-profit model that allows for
Absolutely.
the structure you exactly described.
The utility company is going to make a 9% return on their investment.
So they're putting that in rate base. Basically, the Public Service Commissions allow them to put in rate bases like you put a transformer or wire in.
Exactly. Instead of building a new fossil fuel burning power plant in upstate New York, the utility company is allowed to rate base and invest in solar panels in New York City, in this poor neighborhood, and to make a financial return of 9%, which is what they need to make for their investors. Wall Street's able to invest, and they can get 5 to 6% on their investment. Right. And the low-income community residents are able to get enough money for groceries every month in order to manage and modify and monitor their own energy efficiency and energy usage. By the way, of course, they get some of the jobs that come from installing and owning and operating the solar panels. So that's where we think we're headed. And the question is, are our communities going to take advantage of this kind of opportunity with the changing technology, the changing green energy technology, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Great.
Thank you. Paul, I want to shift to a final section, which is about some of the kind of advice you have for the folks here. And Paul, I want to ask you specifically how they should think about energy consumption, consumer business energy consumption. What is a caring, responsible person who's really being conscious and has real foresight about this change on a consumer level or a business that they run? How should they approach this?
Call us.
Call you?
So, when you think about that answer is, you really need somebody to help you guide you through this evaluation of your facilities. Donnel just talked about it. Some utilities still do this for their customers, going in and evaluating. What is the right thing? Penny McPhee's out here, I know, in the audience. So when you think about the stadium that's being built here in Atlanta, the new Falcon Stadium, it's a platinum building. LEED platinum building. Has solar, and it has connections for electric vehicles. It's reprocessing of the water. All the construction had that idea of how can we get to be the most energy efficient stadium in America. Well, the same goes with any business owner, any homeowner that says, what do I want to do to ensure that I'm being an energy efficient home? Do you want a Nest? We're putting Nest in a lot of our customers' homes. Connect it to the right type of rate. But the Nest thermostat will give you a lot of information about behaviors within the home. It also gives you a platform to give you information about when are you using it and when do you need to cool down the house or heat up the house, either one. But think about the future, and we can help guide you along that path. We view ourselves not as your utility supplier. We view ourselves as your energy partner. And that partnership goes to, if you want solar, we'll be there with you in making those wise energy choices. If you want energy efficiency in your home, we'll help you go through that process. And for those that are working from a Kroger or a Publix grocery store, what is the combination to make sure you're energy efficient? That's the focus that we have, because we think if you do those things, I don't have to build a next power plant, but also I think about your satisfaction. And then as evolution occurs in terms of the energy platforms, be it if you want batteries and if you want solar on your rooftop, that we have that partnership strong enough that we'll be able to supply that to you.
Great. That's awesome. We're going to take questions in 2 minutes. So if you do have a question, you can tweet it with the hashtag CGI 2016. and we'll go through those questions. Before we do, I want to ask both Donnel and Adrianna what your advice is for people who want to transition their communities. What's working? Transitioning communities to a climate-friendly future. What are the key?
Well, I think partnerships, I mean, again, I'm not trying to just piggyback on all of your comments, but you hit it. Partnerships are critical, whether it's an energy partnership, whether it's a coalition partnership, whether you're partnering with a block power or even just community partnerships. The more that you can build these networks of different people with different visions, the better the results are going to be. And the more you're going to get that needed representation. And that's where the great ideas begin, is when you're able to bring together a health professional, a business professional, a community leader. And when we talk about community leaders, we're talking about everybody, maybe a small business owner who owns the barber shop down the street but knows everybody. That is what we need. We need to make sure that we're talking about building those partnerships. And here at CGI, I think we have a really good opportunity to talk about all of our different issue areas, and every single one of those. Yes, we need the policy, but the policy needs to be put into action. And once we have those two, for me, CGI is the place where we can build the partnerships and we can put those policies into action. We can build out the dreams that will actually make policies mean something. Policy is the foundation. What we build on it is really up to us.
Great. Donnel?
Yeah, I think that I had the good fortune to be invited to CGI-U, which is for university students. I was in graduate school. I was trying to learn about business so that I could start my company. And, Chelsea Clinton had a quick coffee with us, and, we were all young people, right? And you walk into these rooms in CGI-U, and there's a CEO and a senator and the head of NRDC, and there's all these really powerful people. So we were really intimidated. And she said, you got to find your voice. You have something valuable to say. And so in my working group, Con Edison and the governor's office in New York were two of the participants in the working group. And they started heading, who are working with us on our microgrid, which I described, they started kind of heading down this path that I thought was stupid. And I listened to him for about 30 minutes, and I was like, this is just a dumb idea. These guys, they're I don't know what's going on. So I gave myself permission to interrupt these guys and say, I think you're doing the same thing that we just did. It didn't work. We tried it in the Obama stimulus, and that piece of it wasn't successful. Why would we duplicate it? And out of that, developed a relationship, which is turning into this microgrid, hopefully, God willing. And so I think that CGI America is an awesome place where I just really encourage everybody to give yourself permission to find your voice. I think one of the most important parts is when you go into these rooms with really powerful people, you learn that there's no master plan, right? And so it's up to all of us to really come up with that.
So your advice is to tell people they're stupid, and then you walk away with the partnership. This is an experiment. We'll see how it plays out this afternoon. So we're going to go to some of the questions that have been submitted by Twitter. The first one is for Donnel. How can the block power model be deployed to other resources like water?
Sure, and this is an issue in San Francisco, obviously. If you look at Europe, there's a ton of existing technologies. They've been focused on energy efficiency and distributed generation in ways that we haven't in America because of our abundance of energy and low cost. If you look at Japan, same deal. And so there's a lot of existing technologies where we don't need to go out and reinvent the wheel. There's stuff that we can just order that can help us with water conservation. So there's smart pumps that have software in them, smart water pumps that can help manage the way that hot water circulates. So, we like to have the hot water ready for us when we take a shower. Well, you got to constantly heat that hot water, and that comes with an energy consumption cost. And so there's smart water pumps and things like that. There's sensors for your pipes. There's all sorts of new technologies that can be instantly applied. The challenge is, how do we distribute and finance the installation of these projects? How do we hire people from our low and moderate income communities and communities of color to install these new technologies?
Well, even on an industrial basis, many of you probably don't know, there's a water research center here. It's a joint venture with a lot of different manufacturers plus Georgia Tech. How do you reduce the overall water consumption in industrial processes? So that research center is really driving to try to reduce it. Go back to this agricultural platform in inner cities. It uses 90% less water than a farm in the Midwest. So you think about using a 20-story building and have floors full of agriculture, and it uses 90% less water. So those are the type of technologies that are out there.
Our next question is, what are the benchmarks, key indicators of sustainable and resilient cities?
I'll start, but I think, again, we need to define what those benchmarks are. For us, and personally, I think what we need to look at is our people. If we don't have opportunities and we don't have healthy communities, then we really are not sustainable. Because we can have all the infrastructure we need, but if it's not proportionately distributed to really benefit the communities that are in need and to really engage communities to be part of that solution, it's almost that sweat equity. Yes, it is, but also we need to be bought in, we need to know what's happening, and ownership in our cities and in our success. So for me, one of the key elements is that's how we build sustainable cities. Resilience is built in there by virtue of bringing those voices to the table and really talking about how economics plays into the entire picture, because you can't separate them. And the minute you do, then that's when we generally lose the environmental conversation, because economics trumps it. But the truth is, we don't have to separate them. They are intertwined. They're intertwined with health. And so the more that we're able to keep those that way, that's how we create truly sustainable, resilient cities.
I'd like to add to that quickly. I just think that health is so important. If you look at Flint, Michigan, for us to be the country that we are and to have an entire city go through that is really challenging. But if you look at buildings throughout cities and rural neighborhoods, they have lead. They're giving kids asthma, and in doing so are driving up our healthcare costs across our national healthcare system. And so not only is it good for the environment, but it's good for our children health-wise, and it's going to save hospitals money. We have a project in New York City in the Bronx, which has the highest asthma rates in the country. The hospital has given us data on which buildings across the Bronx are causing the highest number of children in those buildings to go to the emergency room with asthma. We're able to target those buildings and then green them. And because we're lowering hospital emergency rate admissions costs, the hospital is able to start investing in green energy because it's flowing back through to their bottom line, right? Because they're lowering their highest cost, which is emergency rooms. So I just think health is really, really important. I'm really glad that you highlighted that.
Great. We have 2 more questions. What can people advocate for that will make a real difference?
Adrianna, you do first.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to oversimplify it, but considering there is an election in the near future, I think that we all need to own our voices and own our leadership. And what we can all advocate that makes a real difference is for our rights. And for an opportunity to tell our stories and somehow be able to just ask for what we need. I mean, frankly, odds are, even though unless you're talking about, oh, well, I want a bigger TV. No. If you think about how could I benefit my community? More than likely, even if you have no education, you're going to see things come up in your mind, and you can advocate for that. Advocate for your right to be part of the solution. Advocate for opportunities for education, for engagement. So if I had to simplify it in one word, it would be advocate for engagement. Advocate for your space and ensure that you have that space to speak and to call for what you deserve.
Great. Paul?
Yeah, I would just add, just be informed too. Don't take the headline as information to go forward with your voice. Go deeper than just the headline. Understand what the issues are. Be informed so you can be more conversant in terms of the issues that we face in cities and as in this country. Too many people just get the headline and they think that's the answer. It's not. And I would just advocate, if you will, to go deep. Encourage yourself to go deeper and understand the issues more deeply.
We're going to take the last question before we wrap up. What infrastructure investment would move your work the furthest, fastest? Janelle, do you want to?
That is a trick question. It's a trick.
It's the last trick question.
It's a great question.
It's so
It's a great question. So I actually think I don't know if you guys watch Louis C.K. I think he's great. And he has this great joke about how you're flying on a plane and you're complaining because you can't get Wi-Fi access. But when you take a step back, right, it's amazing that you're flying through the air and you can get on the internet and get on your laptop and your smartphone. So I think the smartphone is really, really amazing. And if I was making an infrastructure investment that would change our work, there's a lot of data that we have to organize in order to green low and moderate income communities. We need the electricity consumption data from the utility company. We need the fuel, the oil, the gas consumption about what we're burning to heat the buildings. We need solar irradiation data. We need data on the health impacts to the local hospital system. There's just a ton of data. And a lot of that data we think we can start to collect through our smartphones. And there's a level of infrastructure inside the smartphones. There's sensors that Apple has really driven the cost super low, that they're really produced really cheaply in China, but we of course want to start producing them here, that can sense particulate matter so that we can get a sense of how much dirt and dust and allergens are in the air that might be triggering an asthma attack, or how much traffic pollution is coming from our highways in the city of Atlanta and going into our schools and triggering asthma there, and sending kids to the emergency room and forcing parents to leave work to go meet their kid in the emergency room. So if we could distribute these sensors so that they can collect data cheaply and connect that data to the smartphones, and then connect that smartphone data to a large database where we all can do analysis and figure out how to green our communities effectively, that to me would be a really smart, low-cost, broadly distributed infrastructure investment.
That's a great answer to the trick question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So we're just about out of time. I want to ask each of you as we wrap up. I'm going to start with Paul. Just a few sentences. We just have a quick amount of time. What your final takeaway is for the participants here.
So again, thank you for letting us be here with you to share some of our wisdom, some of our insights, and some of the innovation that's being platformed here today. But more than anything, and I think you heard it from Adrianna, is have your voice. Only piece I would add is make sure you're totally informed and make judgments based on total information, not just the headlines. There's innovation happening all over this country, and you should be proud, we are, for Atlanta, that we're on the forefront of being a smart city, putting technology in place, and really doing a lot of right things that are going to move us forward. So I'm very proud to be here.
Great. Adrianna?
I'd like to also say thank you so much to everybody at Clinton Global, and this is amazing. I think that what we have today, we couldn't have dreamt of years ago. So I just invite us to continue to dream and act on our dreams as much as possible, because every step we take towards that dream is a step closer to the future that we can all benefit from. So own your leadership, own your voice, and dream big. It sounds corny, but if we don't do it, we wouldn't have our smartphones. We wouldn't have any of this. So I would encourage us to just go for it.
Great. Donnel?
Yeah, really quick. How to use CGI. Paul, Gary, and I would like to come and meet with you some point later this summer to talk to you about greening Dr. King's church. So if you have 20 minutes at some point later this summer, we'd love to get on your schedule and talk to you about what we learned and how we can green Dr. King's church.
Okay.
Great.
That's how you use CGI.
Great.
It's a deal.
Thank you. Deal.
So my takeaways are there's some really interesting, innovative financing options that are going to make a difference in the environmental, sustainable future of the inner city, that we should be starting thinking about our grammar schoolers and actually equipping them for this transition, and that there are 4 nuclear plants being built in the United States right now, and Paul is connected to 2 of them, and that's part of the energy future that we haven't talked about very much, but is interesting and worthy of its own discussion. So thank you all, and thank you to this great panel for the discussion today.